Hey everyone, and welcome to day 34 of our study through the New Testament, looking at the 250 events in the life of Christ through the Gospels. And we're on part two of the woman at the well, and this comes from John 4 verses 4 through 26. And what we're picking up here is verse 20, verse 4, and this is right after we hit the end of it last or yesterday. At the end of verse 19, and, the woman said, "Sir, you must be a prophet." And she instantly turns the conversation into a question where she asked Jesus about the Jews worship at their place of worship in Jerusalem, and the Samaritans they worship there in on the mount where they were located at, where their ancestors worshipped. And so she's like saying, well, which one's right? And Jesus says, okay. And he's twisted it, so they're kind of changed the conversation here a little bit. He basically says, and I like how he says this, dear woman, there comes a time where it's not going to matter where you worship. So if we go back to verse 20, both the Jews and the Samaritans recognize the commands from their forefathers and from God to identify a special place for worshiping Him. Before it was the tabernacle, and then it became for the Jews it was a tabernacle, and then it became the temple. And for the Gentiles, it was this special temple that they had built. And so the one thing about the Samaritans is they only recognize certain books of the Bible. Uh, and they noted that the first place that Abraham built an altar to God was at Shemek, which overlooked this mountain that they were looking at. So um, this is what became their special place for them to worship. And so we kind of see this back and forth. There was this back and forth of, well, the Jews worshiped in Jerusalem. That was their holy place. So that was the only place to worship God. And the Samaritans said, well, no, our place is where we can worship God. And so there was this kind of contention and back and forth. And so Jesus hits it in verse 21 saying that, hey, look, there comes a time where it's not going to matter where you worship, right? Oh, if it's in this mountain or if it's in Jerusalem. And he goes on to say, you Samaritans know very little about the one you worship. They didn't quite haven't quite as understanding, I guess, as the Jewish and some of the Jewish leaders. And he let them know that salvation is coming through the Jews, which meant Jesus, right? In verse 22 there, he's saying it's going to come through him, through the Jews first. Salvation comes through the Jew first, and then it goes to the Gentiles. But the Jews, he's referring to himself. And he said, but the time is coming, indeed, it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this. Um, he says the Father is looking for those who will worship him that way, for God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And so I want to dive into this spirit and truth a lot in here in verse 23 and 24, because it's been kind of twisted a little bit sometimes, or it's been taken out of context sometimes. And so what we want to get into this is, one of the things he's talking about is it doesn't matter where you worship, especially now. It doesn't matter where you worship at all. It doesn't matter if it's in a church building, if it's in a shopping mall, if it's in your home, if it's where it is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to have a certain name on the building, right? It doesn't have to have like it doesn't have to say certain words or different things like that on the face of the building, the church name. There's been a lot of that that's been tied up. It's about how you worship and the condition of your heart when you worship. And so the spirit side um is focusing on, a lot of people say, well, that's the Holy Spirit, and I don't, a lot of scholars don't believe that, and I lean that way, that the spirit he's talking about is in the spirit of humanity. And so you see here, the word spirit, it points to the let me read this one. Jesus' point here is the person must worship not simply by external conformity to religious rituals and places outwardly, but inward in the spirit, inwardly, with the proper heart and attitude. And so I think that's the reference there. And that's where, the Pharisees has gotten to this point to where, excuse me, that you had to worship at a certain place and you had to do all these little rituals. And if you didn't do these things exactly these simple ways, then you weren't really worshiping God. And if you look in some of our church, or many of our churches today, it's the same way, right? If you don't do this particular thing, or if you don't sing songs this particular way, or if you don't do things in this particular order, or it's even gotten to some craziness, as if you like, depending on, if you don't have certain color carpet, or if you don't have, certain, some people who think if you don't have pews and you have chairs that you're not truly worshiping God. I mean, that's the craziness that religion, and I'll call it religion because it's not Christianity when you get to that point, that religion has gotten into. That they think that all these rituals and traditions are what make you a true worshiper of God, right? And so, and I think that's what he's getting into is like, all right, he's not talking about the rituals that you do. Now there's certain things that we see that we're commanded to do in our worship services, right? Singing, praying, those type of things, taking communion. We see that was a regular thing that they did in their worship services, and so in some sort of teaching, But the wonderful thing about the Bible, and I love this thing about the New Testament, is it doesn't go into great detail of exactly how you should do those things. It just says you should. Now, Paul does go into some stuff, and we'll look at this as we get later in. If it needs to be done in an orderly fashion, right? It can't be a chaos. It can't be, absolute just craziness. And we'll look at that and look at what the actual definition of craziness, because there's some things that, there's some religions where if you go in and it looks like you're having any fun at all in your worship service, and it's not like a funeral, then you're, not really worshiping God. And then there's other people who, think that it needs to be alive and very charismatic type of worship service. And I think there's points to both sides, and I don't think there's anything wrong with one way or the other. And we'll dive and look deeper at that. But to get to the point of what the Pharisees had here, or especially like the Jewish people had here, is like they had these little things so laid out, and it's like this is the only way you can worship God. And we'll see throughout the New Testament that's not how that is. And the fact is, it's not the things you do during worship. It's the heart. It's the condition of the heart, which I think is what the Spirit is referring to, is the condition of your heart, the condition of your spirit when you are worshiping God is much more important than the things that you're doing during the worship of God. And so we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into that, but I think that's the point that he's getting into. And the last part there, it says true worship is empowered by spirit and truth, and in accordance with the truth. That it can occur only in and through Jesus, who is the truth. And that's where I think when we talk about in spirit and in truth, the truth is not. Some people have taken this to mean the truth to be worshiping in spirit, and then the truth part is to be doing things exactly like they are laid out in the Bible. And that's not what he's talking about there. He's talking about himself, right? We're going to be worshiping in spirit, which is our condition of our hearts, and then in the truth, which is Jesus. So we're going to be worshiping Jesus. And that's how I break that down. And as I read that and I understand that, that's how I've interpreted that. Now I know there's probably some other interpretations of that, but to me, if you look at that and who he's talking to and the way he's talking about that to me that makes the most sense when you dig that down. And so that the last line I put there is authentic worship involves an inward change of heart, not just an outward observance, but real followers of God worship in complete sincerity. And so I think that's where we've got to be careful in Christianity, that we don't get into this idea that the way that we worship God is the only way that's the right way, whatever particular religion or denomination we're a part of, because that gets kind of silly when you like really start to broaden it out, because a lot of worship is culture, and in the we'll see in the New Testament, as we look at the different letters and the different people that they visited, each one had their own style of worship. Each culture had their own style of worship, and we see that in the world today, right? If the American church or certain American churches said, "Hey, the only way we worship is the only true way to worship God, and everyone else is wrong, and you're actually wrong if you don't worship this way," I'd like to see you go over to China or to Africa or to some of these other countries, be like, oh no, you got to do it the American way, right? That doesn't make any sense. And so we've got to look at and make sure that we don't get caught up in this Pharisaic attitude of, well, the only way, right way is the way we do it. That's not how it works. It's about the condition of your heart worship when you're worshiping God. Then there's a lot of truth to that, and obviously to make sure you are truly worshiping God. And there's a thing in there too, but I think that's important for us to look at. And there's so many things that we see in this visitation with the woman at the well, and so he says that to her, talking about how to worship. That there's a time and coming. It's not going to matter where you worship. It's going to matter. What's really going to matter is the condition of your heart when you're worshiping God. And so the woman says, "Oh, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who was called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." And so she understands that he's going to come and that everything's going to be explained to him. And in verse 26 here, I want you to pay attention to this because Jesus says something here that he is only really recorded, as far as I can find it, one time. And he says to her, then Jesus told her, "I am the Messiah." All right, so this is one of the few times, there may be another one, I'd have to look again, where he comes right out and says, "Yeah, I'm Christ." There's a lot of verses where he alludes to it, or he'll say, "I am," or "I am the Son of God," or "I and the Father are one," and those type of things. But very hardly ever does he ever just come out and say, "Yeah, I'm the Christ, I'm the Messiah." And anyone who says it to him, typically tells them, "Don't go tell anyone." And so I want you to understand that the very first time that Jesus really admits who he was, it's to a woman, and to anyone, not just some woman, to a woman who was considered, well, in the Jewish world, lower than a dog, and then also in her own community, low because she's had 5 husbands and she's not married to the guy that she's living with now. And so I find this amazing because it's countercultural to how we think things should go, right? If you're a high level teacher or high level preacher or all these things that we tend to glorify in the church, then you wouldn't even want to. Then, a lot of times you wouldn't want to even be associated with someone like this, and especially not seen talking alone with someone like this, right? But Jesus humbles himself to the point that he shows such compassion for her that he goes to the point of making sure to have this conversation with her, and then going to the point of letting her know for the first time to anyone who he is, and the importance of who he is. And so I think this is a truly remarkable thing that we need to focus on. And I don't think we look at these type of things enough or go deep enough into how important that is that he let her know that. And then we're going to see in the next couple sections, she goes and goes a whole lot further. And so it's awesome to see this interaction, and it's one of the first interactions we see in the beginning of Jesus's ministry, of him establishing this, and he's establishing it with kind of the low lives of the world that we have here. And I have an appreciation for that, because too often in the church and in the world, we wouldn't consider something like that. Oh no, we have to have people who are in just fine standing, right? They have to be people of wonderful character, and all these people we're going to interact in. And then even if a lot of times in the church, it's like, well, we're not really going to have a lot to do with these people until it's like, yeah, you can become a Christian once you kind of clean yourself up and do all this stuff and the appearance is right. Right? We got to make sure everything appears correct. That's probably one of the biggest downfalls in the church right now is it's like, well, everything has to appear correct, or it's all about our image. It's all about what we look like. And Jesus didn't care. Jesus did what was right, and he met those people who he knew he needed to meet with, and he got down in the mud with them, literally, and he got down in the dirt and he got dirty. And us as Christians, we need to learn how to do that again and be more like Christ. So again, kind of when this again, I'm passionate about this one because this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, and for many reasons, because it points to a whole lot of things that us as Christians should be. And one of the things I point to more than anything when we're talking about, oh, we need to mirror, like, a lot of times we'll say, well, we need to mirror the church of the New Testament, and we start in Acts and move forward. And my thing is no, we really need to mirror the Gospels and look at Jesus and mirror exactly how he did everything, and use the rest from Acts on as a guide to how we should be as a church. But if we want to see how to truly minister to someone and how to truly evangelize and be Christ-like, then we need to study how Christ was with people. And this is what we see when we look at Christ and how he was. So, anyways, I know I ran there. Again, this is the end of this series, and it's going to continue on into the results of her. She's going to go and convert a bunch of people. We're going to see that. But again, as always, if you're getting something out of these, I hope you really appreciate them. I appreciate you watching. If you have not, please take the time to subscribe or share this with someone if it's helping you. Really appreciate you watching. Thank you.